King Solomon looked back over his life and wrote a reflection. He called himself Qoheleth, a Hebrew word that means the preacher. From chapter 2 of his reflection is the Bible reading this morning. I said to myself, "Come now, I will make a test of pleasure. Enjoy yourself." But again, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, "It is mad," and of pleasure, "What use is it?" I searched with my mind how to cheer my body with wine, my mind still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly until I might see what was good for mortals to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks. I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I also had a great possession of herds and flocks, more than any who had ever been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and of the provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and delights of the flesh and many concubines. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had spent in doing it. And again, all was vanity and a chasing after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. After being anointed as king, Solomon went to a sacred place to offer the requisite sacrifice. That night, God appeared to him in a dream. God told him, "Solomon, ask whatever you want, and I will grant it to you." Solomon responded this way: "Give me the wisdom I need to rule your people with justice, and to know the difference between good and evil. Otherwise, how would I ever be able to rule this great people of yours?" God granted Solomon's request, but sadly, as the man amassed more power, more possessions, enjoyed more pleasures, had great prestige, he wanted more of that. Stuff became the desire of his heart. As I mentioned, Solomon, now in his older years, looks back upon his life with remorse. He recognized that the unabated pursuit of more stuff did not deliver happiness. Now, it's easy for us to wag our finger at Solomon's excesses, like building a horse stable out of marble. More humbling is taking a closer look at our own use of the resources we have. A checking account, our salary, Social Security, 401k, inheritance, summer job, and the like. And as we consider how personal wealth turned Solomon's desire away from God, it also is well for you and me to ask this question: how would God have us distinguish the boundary between the thankful life and the self-absorbed life, between responding to the needs of others and pursuing our personal appetites. Please join me in prayer. Gracious God, may the words that I speak and the reflections that arise within us be used by you to give us a heart that beats in the rhythm of your love. For Jesus' sake, amen. So Solomon's reign really began quite well. You might know how Solomon adjudicated between the two women who argued about whose child was the living baby and whose child was the one that died overnight. Early in his rule, he also directed the building of a magnificent temple where all the people of Israel could gather for worship. God's provision, Solomon's skill, and historical circumstance combined to make Israel the economic power of the region. The nation controlled the major trade routes going from Egypt to other Middle Eastern nations, and as a result, both nation and ruler amassed great wealth. As we previously discovered in the sermon series, the tempter specializes in using material success to enticing persons to wanting more. He does this first by blurring the distinction between the blessings of creation and the God of creation. For Solomon, this bad case of affluenza and his realpolitik conspired to erode both heart and wisdom. Solomon's ability to discern the difference between good and evil became a muddle as greed overwhelmed him. With desires for more running amok, Solomon honored the gods of his many wives by placing idols in the very temple he had dedicated to the one true God. But let's turn the lens in order to look at our own day. Consider that popular phrase, the American dream. What behaviors get associated with pursuing the American dream, and what metrics gets used to determine whether or not we're successful? From what I hear and observe, we Americans measure success by our ability to accumulate more power or influence over other people, more possessions, able to enjoy finer pleasures, having prestige. To most of us, those are signs of being successful. In a noteworthy experiment launched in 1950s, the psychology department of a major university interviewed recent graduates to discover the correlation between material wealth and happiness. They interviewed these graduates, and over the ensuing 40 years, they again interviewed the same persons. The study revealed a consistent response pattern. Simply put, at the initial interview, having just secured their first employment after college, the graduates were pleased. But almost to a person, each one said, it would be so much better if I would only have 10% more income. 10 years later, with income that far exceeded that 10% mark, they said the same thing. And again, 10 years after that, and 10 years after that. If only I had 10% more, it would be enough. But more was never enough. feeling settled always eluded them. Such is the tempter's deceit. Eventually, Solomon's ravenous appetite took the man's spending beyond his bank account. And to satisfy the mounting indebtedness, Solomon gave away a portion of the promised land that God gave to the people of Israel. But that did not curtail his spending. He did the unthinkable by conscripting his own people into forced labor. Eventually, the dual strain of indebtedness and forced labor conspired to tear the nation apart. That was when Solomon, now an old man, awoke from his self-indulgent intoxication. Reviewing the way he lived and how he ruled, Solomon concluded, "Vanity of vanities. All is vanities. What do people gain from all the toil at which they toil under the sun?" Those are the opening lines of his reflection, what we call the book of Ecclesiastes. It is later, with sober appraisal, Solomon confesses, "Whatever my eyes desire, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all that was mine." All was vanity. It was chasing after the wind. All was vanity and a chasing after wind, and there was nothing to gain under the sun. Solomon finally realized the markers by which he measured success were not the things that give life meaning and purpose or an enduring legacy. Contrasting Solomon's story is Jesus' depiction of the widow who places 2 copper coins in the offering plate. Jesus noticed her while sitting in the temple across from the big copper basin where the people tossed in money for the collection. As recorded in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, Jesus observed, "Many of the rich were making large contributions. This poor widow came up and put in her 2 small coins, a measly 2 cents. Jesus called his disciples over and said to them, 'The truth is, this woman gave more to the collection than all the others put together. All the others gave what they'll never miss. But this woman gave extravagantly what she could not afford. She gave her all.'" The truth is, everything I am and everything I have belongs to God. And when you and I place an offering in the envelope or dedicate a day to volunteer service, like with a Habitat build, what we are doing is managing that which God first gave us. We are stewards. The widow embodied this understanding. Solomon did not. For Sherry and me, tithing our household income has served as one way to help us delineate between desires run amok and faithful stewardship. We made this commitment to tithe as we prepared for marriage. 6 years, 2 children later, we purchased our first home. The high interest rate required us to do some belt tightening. The following March, when Sherry reviewed the tax forms before signing them, she remarked that our charitable giving did not come up to the 10% of income mark. I responded with a tepid rationalization that revealed more about my desire for more had eroded my commitment to tithing. Sherry responded plainly and to the point. If we could not afford owning a house and maintaining our tithe, then we could not afford owning a house. When Jesus draws our attention to the widow, he makes a distinction between her simple devotion and the vanity of chasing after wind displayed by the others. However, the gift of her simple devotion is more than a label called tithing, believing in Jesus, or living as Jesus lived. Those certainly are qualities of Christian discipleship. But they are trailing indicators of something else. James Finley, a writer and Christian seminar leader, describes the transformation from self-absorption to simple devotion and discipleship this way. The Christian way of life is a life in which we are called to follow Jesus in a process of self-emptying, by which we come to realize that ultimately there's nothing real in us that is less or other than God's infinite love. That is our life. In other words, we are called to realize, to have the mind of Christ. This day-by-day formation of a Christian imagination that is having the mind of Christ and seeing the world no longer from a human point of view changes how we see ourselves in relationship to God, in relationship to other persons, and in relationship to the pressing issues of this day. So let us consider, what if? What if we set aside the cultural-bound norms for success? What difference might this make when considering happiness, joy, and purpose in our life? What if we latch onto a definition that declares success is knowing the will of God in doing it? What if, as church community, we continue to join together to arrive at our best understanding of God's preferred and promised future and invest ourselves accordingly? What if we make it our daily practice to entreat the Holy Spirit to clear away the fog that hides the tempter's lies, to calm our hunger for material things, to cleanse our desires of our hearts that does not honor God, and to convey the truth about emptying ourselves to make more room to living love and being ambassadors of that love? Might we then discover meaning, purpose, happiness, and contentment that would otherwise elude us? At the first two cottage meetings, I met with our church council and with our youth. Noteworthy are the responses they gave to the request to identify their most significant experiences here at Friedens Lutheran Church. Council member and teen both spoke about efforts to help persons in need. Think about that. The most significant experience they've had as church members is when we banded together to help persons in need. Emptying ourselves of self-absorbed desires in order to become available to the love of Christ coming upon us and flowing through us is what distinguishes life responding to need from life pursuing greed. Over the past 3 months of introductions, I have learned simple devotion is very much part of the Friedens story. And although we do not always get it right, and sometimes we stumble wanting to go our own way, the stories you have told me says something very important about Friedens. We live by our name. We want to bring peace to persons broken by life circumstances. So this is my prayer going forward, that having the mind of Christ and showing simple devotion will continue to identify who we are and how we serve. Amen.